What do we chat?
Jesus!
Right.
Oh, God.
Big old JC.
It's Jesus Day. That's true.
Who's in the house?
JC's
in the house.
The two that were raised Protestants.
That's enough then. We're starting our discussion. Oh, damn. That was the wrong episode. You guys comfortable with all that? You want me to keep that? Is that what we're going to go with?
I don't know.
I don't know where to...
Yeah, let's try that again. See what
let it
you
come.
do.
I don't know.
In this corner, weighing about as much as a Catholic Pope, our resident Catholic Riley, versus the man who weighs as much as John 3:16. Is this the big, guys, the big Protestant versus Catholicism?
W-E-E. Like, is there...
WWE? Yeah, absolutely.
even
Because
know
all the
the
battling is
initials.
pointless. Oh, eye roll from Riley. Okay.
And a bunch of Protestants too, Sam, I'm sure.
More...
Pointless. Ouch. John
The-
There's
Wesley.
Protestants that have devoted their
Ouch,
lives
Martin
to
Luther.
Like that guy I showed you
Yeah,
on
poor
YouTube.
Martin Luther. He didn't do what he
Talking about
did.
the
Ouch,
Tower
Henry.
of Babel. He just went on.
Martin Luther converted back on his deathbed.
It's fine.
We're about to embark on a perilous journey to demonstrate something that I first heard during my years of fieldwork in the Spiritualist Church. That Jesus of Nazareth was what we would call on this podcast an occultist. Spiritualists don't tend to like the word occult, so they specifically called him a great teacher and healer and medium. But for our purposes, it amounts to the same thing. There's a bunch of stuff we need to clear up before we can even start to make the case on this. First, let's just remind ourselves what occult means to the alchemical actors. The word itself is generally considered to have been coined by Eliphas Levi in the 19th century, and refers to magical practices after the Enlightenment, roughly 1700 to the present day. Here, we use occult as a catch-all term to include the esoteric, and go a bit further still to include pretty much any practice, ritual, or belief that involves the manifestation of the supernatural in the natural world. Most Christians would at least agree with us then on that broad definition. Christians?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Jesus performed miracles either through the power of the Holy Spirit or through his own divinity, which contradicted or overrode the rules of the natural world. Most of the miracles revolved around a kind of healing, which is why we're getting around to Jesus in this series. He healed the sick, he exorcised demons, he raised the dead. For our listeners who are not so familiar with Christianity, a couple of facts about these events might surprise you. First, scholars are fairly confident that Jesus was a real historical person. Second, we're also pretty confident that he actually performed most, if not all, of the miracles attributed to him. In fact, he wasn't the only healer or miracle worker wandering around Greater Jerusalem at this time period. Arguably, what made him stand out, besides of course his crucifixion and rising from the dead, was that he performed all of his services for free. The question for us today is, how did Jesus perform his miracles? And how does he fit into the broader story we're telling about spiritual healing? My name is Rob C. Thompson. I am the Supreme Hierophant of our secret order of alchemical actors. My PhD is in alternative religious ritual of various stripes. I'm joined by Olivia Littoral,
Hello!
our Grand Master of the Order, and
Hello!
my fellow non-Christian, I guess, for this conversation,
Yeah,
because
I feel weird.
we're even now.
Well, it's like I used to be there, and I jumped ship.
Oh
so
yeah, I was
kinda
never there in
like-
the first place, so.
It was fun. Good times.
Let's introduce our fellow panelists today. We've got Riley Claxton back in the seat. How long has it been?
A little while.
It's been a little
A
while.
hot minute.
So Riley is, those of you who are longtime listeners know, our resident Catholic.
Resident Catholic.
Oh my gosh, do I have an intro song now?
Yeah.
It's pretty sweet, honestly.
I was working on the website today, and I just went ahead and labeled Riley resident Catholic. So I think
feel like
that's
it should
going to be
be
her
more like-
official title.
Wow.
now.
It should be like more
Yeah.
Gregorian chant, though.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm sorry
true.
that my song wasn't good enough for you, Protestant.
That was a little too Protestant-y to the song.
Resident.
That was pretty good. Yeah.
See, I started you. I got you in the mood. Speaking of people who are in the mood, Sam Steen is our Protestant for the day.
I don't like that they're laughing at the mention of my name.
Of you being in the
You
mood.
said you were in the mood. Made me feel weird.
He's in the mood for podcasting.
Jesus.
For Jesus.
Oh.
So Riley's going to provide the Catholic perspective. Sam's going to provide the Protestant perspective.
Yep.
Okay. I do want to note that Riley is a liberal Catholic, and that Sam is questioning Christian?
A conflicted Christian.
Conflicted.
Sam is a future Catholic.
She's really working, having me switch sides.
So you can see what kind of fun we're going to have today.
This is good.
So that's by way of saying, I know that our listeners, many of you are like Olivia, you've departed from the Christian church, or like myself.
Enough of that, please.
You've
It's
been
hurting my ears. My
worked-
Protestant ears.
You've worked on the outside of the established dominant traditions. But so the Christians we've invited to speak with us are regular contributors to the podcast, first of all, so they're comfortable with the subject matter. Second of all, they're not trying to convert any of you.
Just Sam.
That is the name of the game in Protestantism, guys.
We, the members of the secret
Order of alchemical actors, do solemnly commit ourselves to a full and honest telling of the history of the occult as far as we know it.
Amen.
Oh no.
That's the first time that's ever happened. I don't know how to respond to that.
I felt really weird about it.
It was more of a I wanted to see how you guys would respond.
We kind of like froze.
You did freeze.
We were like deer in headlights.
I'm not
for a
proud of
second.
our
It was like when you catch your cat about to knock something off the shelf. You're like, hey, stop that. It's like,
Yeah, we just looked at each other like, what do we...
so go ahead and just knock it over now,
It's
guys.
too late. It's off the
Do
shelf.
we also say amen?
We want. Let's get to our 3 plugs, Olivia.
Plug!
Let's start
different
with
every time.
it is, yeah.
That was like a little ghosty at the end.
Ooh.
All right. We're getting there.
The Holy Spirit.
We want to give
Sorry.
we want to give a word of thank you to our guest scholar for today's episode, regular listener, friend of the podcast, Emery Jones. Emery is the second guest scholar we've had so far. They vetted our episode and offered suggestions to keep us on the right side of the scholarship. Emery is a graduate of St. Edward's University, and their research concerns trans imagery in early Jewish and Christian mystical and apocalyptic literature.
Whoa.
Yeah, both canonical and extra-canonical. Trans imagery. Isn't that interesting?
Huh.
I would love to hear what they have to say just on that subject. It
yeah.
just sounds so interesting.
We've got to invite Emery to speak more on this.
Also, I like their name, Emery.
Emery. Also, Emery considers what this means today in a Christian faith fractured by competing understandings of gender.
Yeah.
So, interesting stuff.
Bravo.
Thank you, Emery.
Yeah.
Let's mention our sources, which Emery also helped us with. Jesus the Magician by Morton Smith, The Historical Jesus by John Dominic Crossan, The Life of Apollonius by Philostratus, translated by F.C. Conybeare, and Miracles in Greco-Roman Antiquity by Wendy Cotter.
Wonderful.
Yes, indeed.
Nice.
And last but not least, the Trinity of podcasting.
The Holy Trinity of
The
podcasting.
Holy Trinity of podcasting.
Nice.
Subscribe to the episode. Number 1, review us if you're enjoying. And number 3, give us some money on Patreon. There it is. It's 3. It is 3.
Yeah.
All right. Close up the plugs.
Plug!
Is that official now? That's what we do?
Plug them back up.
You let me do it.
All right, I had said at the top of this that this was going to be a perilous journey. We're sailing carefully between the Scylla of Christian dogma and the Charybdis of biblical scholarship. I've been at some conferences. Biblical scholars can be intense. They will.
Oh, yeah.
They will cut a scholar.
The religious guys said taking at UMD are brutal.
Yeah, so let's get a couple of things out of the way before we attempt this feat. First, I am not a biblical scholar. I will not cut a scholar. I don't read Greek. I don't read Aramaic. My doctoral language was French, and the historical period I'm most comfortable talking about is technically 1870 to 1890.
That's
solid.
Yeah, really, though.
Good years.
They were. I'm reaching what I consider to be reasonable conclusions based on the scholarship of people who do read those languages and do study the first 100 years of the first millennium for a living. Second, there's an important difference between history, which we're interested in today, and theology, which we're going to try to avoid. History lets us know what conclusions we can reasonably draw based on the evidence we have. Theology is more like philosophy. It makes reasoned cases for belief systems and draws conclusions based on those beliefs. Theology in this context is concerned with how Jesus understood himself and how the tradition has interpreted his life and words. History looks for verifiable evidence that makes sense given the context. That doesn't make history more significant. Belief really requires both to function. But if we got involved in theology, we'd have to start guessing at whether the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons or the Methodists or the Catholics had the best interpretation of the Gospels. What's your brand of Protestantism?
Well, the church I technically go to is called non-denominational.
He's the no branch version.
But I grew up
Non-committal.
Episcopalian, which is Diet Catholics.
Yeah, that's the flavor. Yeah. Okay, good. Where were we? I got really thrown off with the non-denominational thing.
It's a thing.
It's a growing.
Yeah, it's
growing.
So we can't
big.
guess which of those have the best interpretation of the Gospels. And the truth is, nobody knows. Religion is essentially an interpretation of a miracle. I like that definition. I'm going to hold to that. And as I can't say enough on this podcast, interpretation is subject to doubt.
Yes.
All right, so let's get to what we know. Most of what we know about Jesus of Nazareth comes from 4 reports, better known as the Gospels. The oldest is attributed to Mark, was written around the year 60, or about 30 years after Jesus was crucified, give or take. Matthew and Luke were next, writing around 90, when and then John, which was a bit after them. So from a historian's perspective, Mark is the most authoritative, because he's closer in history to the actual life of Jesus, and because his book was actually a source for the later accounts. Matthew and Luke drew on Mark and also on a hypothetical. I want to stress hypothetical because Bible scholars are arguing about this right now. A hypothetical, what they call the Q source, just the letter Q, and that may or may not exist. This is an account of Jesus' life that has been lost to history, but seems to have informed both Matthew and Luke. When we compare them, there seemed to be this underlying secret book. Occult secret, and accounts for many similarities between their texts that aren't also found in Mark. So we can see that, they took Mark and they just took a bunch of Mark and they were like, oh, we love all this stuff. This is great. We're going to work with this. And then we can see this other stuff that is not in Mark that they both have in common. So we're guessing that this comes from a single source and they pulled them together.
So that's the only...
Little vocab term. The Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptics, and John, which came a little bit later, is not one of those because the 3 of them are more similar than John. And there's doubt, I feel like the most doubt surrounding the Gospel of John. So they're called the Synoptics.
Poor John. Mm-hmm. But he made it into the top 4.
He did.
So
There we go.
you got to give him some credit there.
Good old John. Everyone knows a John.
Who makes it into the top 4, but yeah, still doubt him a little bit. The Gospel writers tend to agree about the basic outline of Jesus' life, but there are differences between their accounts. Geography and chronology are a little messy, for example. Also, they differ on which aspects of the story of Jesus' life they include. The Christmas story, for example, only comes up in Matthew and Luke. Mark and John start with Jesus' baptism and focus on his ministry. Let's talk about Christmas for a moment, shall we?
Oh, let's talk about Christmas.
Oh. All right, I can feel the
You know I
hostility.
have feelings.
I've not heard such feelings from Olivia.
You haven't?
No, never. I've
Pagan
never.
corner over here. Hi.
Well, Christmas is a little of each, to be honest. Let's talk about the Jesus part. Jesus' birth narrative is generally subject to a fair amount of scholarly doubt. The story goes that Jesus was born in a manger while his family was on a trip to register their names with a Roman census. Shortly after birth, he was visited by angels and magi from the Far East, all declaring his divinity. This divinity was confirmed by the miraculous nature of his birth. His mother was a virgin. And Riley was also born of a virgin birth? Help me out with this.
No.
Okay.
So the Immaculate Conception is
Yeah,
not
go
that
ahead.
she was born of a virgin birth.
Oh, I remember I read about this in class, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Immaculate Conception is not, it's that she was conceived without sin. So she herself was conceived without sin.
Without sin.
Yeah, so she...
But with sex.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's not a sin.
Oh, good.
I'm glad we're all on the same page there.
It's not a sin.
So I even believe sex is
But that,
Well, but yeah, the priests aren't getting to it anytime
but
soon.
so the Immaculate Conception is that she was conceived without sin. So it's not that, the kind of analogy that I like to use is that if it was like if the rest of us had fallen into a mud pit, right? And we were all muddy, and then we were taken out of that, we were rescued out of that mud pit, right?
Yeah, and cleaned in baptisms.
Yeah. Whereas Mary, almost fell into that mud pit, but was rescued before she did. That's more of the kind of that she wasn't, it's not like she is this God, but that she was saved.
Some miraculous intervention.
Yeah, so that it was an immaculate conception, that she was conceived immaculately.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Scott, thank you for clearing that up.
You're welcome.
Scholars aren't sure if the census mentioned took place at the right point in history for it to line up with Jesus' birth. There's one question. Also, Jesus probably had brothers and sisters, which challenges the concept of a virginal Mary overall, depending on when they were born, etc., etc. There's also a possibility that the brothers and sisters, the women, weren't literal brothers and sisters, but plausibility stretches in the attempt to keep Mary virginal throughout her life. Right. A little tough. Okay, you guys can do wonderful things.
I will get off on this.
All right.
That's not the purpose of this.
Could have been his cousins anyway, but they are called brothers and sisters. Yeah. So, across traditions and time periods, it's pretty common for believers to invent or exaggerate the birth narratives of their founders. This to me is a slightly larger point. One story of the Buddha has him emerging from his mother's womb, walking and talking, and promising salvation to all of humankind. This doesn't mean that the Christmas story never happened. It's certainly more suspicious than much of the rest of what we know from the Gospels, though, because there's an incentive to develop a powerful origin story. Yeah. Keanu Reeves is in a movie where he plays the Buddha, and they do this scene of the Buddha popping out of the womb. And
are you being serious?
Right? Yeah, no, I'm
what?
completely
Where do
serious.
I watch that?
I don't remember the name of it, but it's
John Wick who?
Is it like a little Keanu Reeves?
It's a CGI baby. It's from, years ago, but yeah.
Whoa.
Anyway.
I will say, what's interesting about that birth story, I think that makes it unique, is how underwhelming and overwhelming it is at the same time. That it is this miraculous conception, but that it's also so completely underwhelming. Right? In
the manger, you mean?
Yeah, literally surrounded by poop and animals. It's just this it's such a dichotomy.
It's nice for the social justice message of Jesus.
My church is really hammering the idea that, Jesus was born at, the lowest level. So, so he's not, the superior thing that couldn't relate to us.
The Romans did have slaves.
Okay.
Could have been slightly worse.
Could have always been worse.
Some of the slaves were actually doing pretty well, though. And it's complicated. So, the Christmas story, oddly enough, points toward Jesus' potential esoteric connections, or already on the occult. The Magi, literally Persian priests and astrologists, were those Middle Eastern guys who brought the newborn Jesus some frankincense and myrrh. Two of my child's favorite toys as a baby. She loved the frankincense and myrrh. Yeah. Couldn't wait to get her hands on that myrrh. Matthew may have included the Magi as a reference to Jesus' training at the hands of Egyptian magic workers in late adolescence.
Oh, shit.
Possibly. In order to get our minds fully around this, although Olivia apparently is already...
Sorry, I'm signed off.
We have to take a deep dive into biblical conspiracy theory.
Oh, God, I love... I'm here.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about... Because didn't they prove, basically, that there's no way based on the constellations? He had to have been born in July, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Jesus was definitely not born on December 25th.
Yeah, okay. I was just making sure. I didn't know we were going to talk about that.
The Christian church's attempt to eliminate a pagan holiday.
Right.
Yes.
But that's not the conspiracy I'm talking about.
What are we talking about?
Because that one, pretty much, we just did that one right then. Now it's over.
Throw it out.
We're talking about what Jesus' enemies said about him during his lifetime and immediately after his death, which is that he was a black magician.
Yo, that's my Jesus. I'm going back to the Methodist Church because they didn't tell me that.
All right, I'm
They
gonna...
probably never will.
No.
Olivia's gotten
Pastor
all
Karen's
excited.
not into that.
And I'm gonna have to say this now. Like most conspiracy theories, it's nonsense. But it clues us into the culture Jesus was performing his miracles in. The case for Jesus' black magician begins in Egypt, where he was supposed to have learned his arts from naked sages.
This is the Jesus I want.
Why naked?
That's just how they were. I actually
There
don't
were no
know.
clothes
But
sages?
they're just, well, there are, but not in Egypt. It's hot there.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe they're just...
Saging
Most
it
people
up,
are naked.
You gotta.
Do you think they
air
at
it
least
out.
wore like jewelry or something? Or were
Air
they
it
just like
out.
completely bare?
I feel like jewelry would... If you're gonna be a naked sage, you don't go with jewelry. You want to go all the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
You
know?
don't want to stand out.
You're a sage. You're
Have you
pure.
met Jim? Oh, yeah. The naked sage? Yeah, he's a cool dude.
He wears an emerald.
Whoa. I had no idea Jim wore an emerald.
Yeah, he's not naked.
Matthew agrees that as a boy, Jesus traveled to Egypt. The Magi give Jesus their frankincense and their myrrh and have a dream that Herod is out to get them, so they return to their own country. They're Magi. They have dreams.
No, I'm just Herod.
And then Jesus...
Yeah, that dude.
I'm just throwing it back to Herod for a second. I just forgot he existed till you just said it.
You giggle every time anyone mentions Herod.
He was a funny dude.
And then Joseph has a dream in
Killed all
which
the
an
firstborns.
angel of the Lord appears to him.
Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee in Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him.
Joseph, Mary, and Jesus stayed in Egypt until after Herod's death, which happened in 4 BC. For those of you who know what BC stands for, this should come as a bit of a surprise. Today we use the letters BCE, meaning before the Common Era, but traditionally BC meant before Christ. Jesus went to Egypt 4 years before he was born. What? Okay, so the truth
He's
is...
Jesus, so he could...
God is outside of time.
Jesus was...
What's that called? Omnitemporal?
Jesus was not actually born in the year 1. We don't know when he was born, but it was roughly between 6 and 4 years before that. So Jesus could have been born 6 years before Jesus.
Before.
Again, chronology is a tricky thing.
Wild.
Okay, so Matthew
Super
placed...
meta.
Super meta. Super meta. Jesus was born before Jesus. So Matthew placed Jesus in Egypt as a boy, although some believed he traveled there between his youth and his baptism by John. In Egypt, the argument goes, is where he received his tattoos. That's right! Jesus might have had tattoos.
My Jesus is
Do you
back.
think they're like super sick tribal tattoos? Or like...
I'm going to let you imagine
American
however
traditional.
You
Live,
want.
laugh, love.
He's
Yeah,
like
or like-
infinity sign.
It's like freedom, and then like the M is flying away in freedom.
It's like instead of mom in a heart, it's God.
Not all those who wander are lost.
So let's give some evidence
tree
for this. Are you guys like being sacrilegious? I don't even know.
Listen, we do it all the time.
Paul claimed to have been branded with the marks of Jesus, i.e. the same marks Jesus carried, and magicians at the time period were often tattooed with spells and symbols. It's possible that Paul meant stigmata in speaking of the marks of Jesus, but that stigmata, given the context, is really unlikely, because the tradition of stigmata is considerably later.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tattoos are actually the more likely explanation. From my perspective, the journey to Egypt and the tattoos are the most plausible parts of the conspiracy theory. After this, it just sort of goes off the rails. But Jesus could have gone to Egypt, and he could have had tattoos. That stuff makes sense. But there's no way to know. What follows from here gets pretty outlandish, so let's all buckle our seatbelts. Yeah.
Click.
Your seatbelt should already be buckled, though, if you're
Clap.
driving and listening to this, so...
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
unbuckle them.
Don't unbuckle. Leave them buckled. Let's turn to one of Jesus' most spectacular miracles, the raising of Lazarus.
All that do with dead.
Big mood.
Yeah. Now, even growing up outside of a church tradition, I heard the story of Lazarus, and you all did. As children... I'm right. Okay.
Wait, what?
Riley heard it in Latin. She didn't know what was going on.
I heard it from my youth pastors, like, and then Lazarus, guys. How crazy. Lazarus stood up. That was my youth pastor, Newell.
Newell.
And
Shout out to Noel.
Okay, so as children, we hear the Lazarus story as a kind of extreme variant on the healing of the sick, right? It presages Jesus' own rise from the dead. It's a nice, foreshadowing. But it also looks an awful lot like necromancy.
That's why I liked it so much as a kid.
Herod wondered if John the Baptist had been brought back to life when stories of Jesus' miracles first surfaced. Some of Jesus' enemies believed he had recalled John's ghost as a familiar spirit and was working with him. Right? In Mark, Matthew, and Luke, Jesus is accused of using the demon Beelzebub as a familiar to accomplish his miracles. This prompts the famous line about a house divided against itself.
How can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand, but hath an end.
It's a good line, and a good defense of any white magic practice. The fact that he needs to say it at all, though, shows how he was interpreted by those who opposed him. They saw him as a black magician. We lose this, right? We don't really reflect on this, but that's how he was being perceived by his enemies. Anti-gospels. Let's say that phrase again. Anti-gospels circulated among the Jews that argued Jesus was, now here it gets really wild, a Galilean magician who practiced cannibalism and engaged in orgies with his followers. This is at basically the same time as the Gospels are being written. And after he had been put to death for his practices, the Romans often crucified or burned magicians by the way. They stole his body in the night and claimed that he descended into heaven. You can read a pretty bald-faced perversion of Jesus' teachings about communal love in the orgies, right? The Eucharist in the cannibalism. Do you see? So they're basically taking the basic tenets of Christianity and turning them on their heads. Mm-hmm. And the resurrection in this account. The resurrection, the stealing of bodies. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this was all a kind of anti-Christian propaganda, and not a word of it was true, except, of course, the tattoos in Egypt, maybe. But it shows how Jesus was perceived. You got me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts before we carry on?
I've heard it before.
No.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Well, just because, my branch of Christianity is really focused on, evangelism and going out and sharing the word. That's like all we're all about. We have youth ministries and stuff. When I go out in my youth ministry stuff and I go to kids, there are plenty of kids who don't believe, and when I start talking to them about it, who get I would say snotty, but I don't want to disrespect them in any way. But in a way, they're being I know this and you don't. So I've heard it plenty of times before from high school kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are they teaching in the high schools?
Nothing. They're just they're like the kids who sit in the back of the class and spin their pens with their fedoras and are I'm failing school because school grades a goldfish on its ability to climb a tree. I'm better than this type stuff.
I see. So they're
yeah,
they're spouting an argument that goes back to ancient Judaism.
Yeah, because they love Richard Dawkins and stuff like that, and so they go down this rabbit hole and get these conspiracies. So when 18-year-old youth pastor Sam Steen walks up and is like, "Hey kids, want to learn about the gospel?" They're like, "Jesus was a cannibal and a necromancer."
I can't believe that's why.
That really surprises me too. I normally don't get that.
Public schools.
I normally
at least at Kent Island.
So the
basic,
atheists have adopted the arguments of the Jews and the pagans from the ancient times.
As a way of discrediting.
Sense,
It does make sense.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated though. That's wild. Shall we talk miracles?
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk miracles.
The more
I get an intro, and so does miracles.
you're on the.
It's I didn't want an intro anyway. So.
Well,
Sorry, I'm
Olivia
sorry.
sings for a lot of things.
It wasn't
Plugs
calling.
get anyway.
Yeah.
The more historically valid story starts when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. Okay, so leaving aside Christmas and all the things that we're not so sure about, we are pretty sure, says John Dominic Crossan, one of the surest things we can know about John the Baptist and Jesus is that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. The Baptist offered a radical alternative to the practice of the Jewish priests, running essentially a cult in the wilderness, a little sect of Judaism. In the established priesthood, for a fee, so we're talking about established Judaism, right? So John is working against this. So the established priesthood worked like this. You could have your sins washed away through priestly sacrifice. John said, I've got a much less expensive variant, and it's called baptism. This was a challenge to the Jewish authorities, and it stirred up all kinds of trouble, because this is how they're making their money. John claimed his baptism as a fulfillment of prophecy, to make the impure pure again and to forgive sin. At this time, one of the temple's major functions was to perform appropriate sacrifices to Yahweh in order to relieve believers of their sins. These were animal sacrifices for the most part and came at a steep price. This led to a money-driven priesthood, which John sought to disrupt. We can think about Jesus throwing over the tables of the money changers in the temple, which is getting at more or less the same issue.
This is like indulgences before indulgences.
Too much money in religion.
Well, and you can compare it to how it's often compared of like the sacrifice of Christ, like being like why Christians don't need to do that. Like we don't have animal sacrifices because he did it and for free. Yeah. Like he to have, you know, especially the people of this culture understand exactly what he was doing was to fulfill like that sacrifice. Like no longer were sacrifices needed. Mm-hmm. And to show that
he paid it for eternity.
And John really paved the way.
Yep.
He preached the Messiah was coming, that an apocalypse was at hand. I don't know about an apocalypse, so we're still waiting on that. And the gospel, a lot of people have preached apocalypse. We're getting to that in our next series. And the gospel writers interpreted this preaching to mean that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. Jesus was, according to Mark, visited by a spirit at his baptism, which drove him deep into the wilderness for 40 nights.
Oh, Satan, right? Is that Satan 40 nights? No?
Not the Holy Spirit.
No.
Oh, but yeah,
is that
Satan
when he goes out
tempted.
into the...
Tempted.
Yeah.
For 40 days. That's like one of my favorite stories.
You just like stuff with Satan.
Yeah.
So 40 days is a powerful mythological time period. It's not only the period of the Old Testament flood and the desert fasts of Moses and Elijah that may have been practice Hebrew prophets used to induce visions, but is also the amount of time the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree to achieve enlightenment.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So, very powerful amount of time. Jesus' experience, let's listen closely to this in light of our last episode. Jesus' experience, driven by the Spirit into the wilderness, called by the Spirit, unable to resist the call, goes off into the wilderness alone. Sounds like the shaman's calling. Right?
Yeah.
He's a shaman. He's a shaman of his people. And we can see that this tradition that Jesus is a part of stretches well beyond Judaism or Christianity into a long-established pattern of spirit workers across the ages. Sort of makes you appreciate him in a different light. The story of Jesus' baptism suggests that Jesus began his career as a member of John's sect. However, after John's arrest, it's clear that Jesus had his own visions and went off in his own direction. So Sam is sort of already pointing at the connections between John's ministry and Jesus, well, both of you, Sam and Riley, that John was saying, I'm going to give you this cleansing free of the church. Jesus picks up that message, but he takes it to the next level, forever and ever. So, to start his ministry, Jesus gathered his first disciples and began to wander the country performing miracles and preaching.
But Simon's wife's mother lay sick with fever, and anon they tell him of her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she ministered unto them. And at even, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils. And all the city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many that were sick of divers diseases, and cast out many devils, and suffered not the devils to speak, because they knew him.
We're not even a full chapter into Mark, and already we're at our central question. How was Jesus performing these miracles? The first thing we've got to accept is that this was a very different time from our own, and miracle workers were not as unique as they might be in our time. Galilee had only been converted to Judaism when the Jews conquered that area between 125 and 75 BCE, and many of these conversions may have only been skin deep, with supposed believers continuing to hold much of their pagan belief system, including a variety of magical practices. And Judaism itself, as it evolved, incorporated a wide variety of these practices, often involving the use of the secret name of God, which transformed over time into the Kabbalah. So far, so good, Christians? Riley, what about this notion of people not performing miracles so much these days? Y'all still do perform miracles.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think it's as prevalent?
I think it still is, but in a different way. Definitely.
How so?
I think for one, it's accepted differently in our culture. Like, it's not viewed in the same way as it was then, and it's typically shut down.
So you mean it's like kept within the church?
Yeah, and it's not typically something listened to outside of the church. Like I mean, okay, evangelization 101 is you never talk about miracles. It's literally because people automatically shut down.
See, but that's what would get Olivia and I into the
exactly. But you're different. You're very different. Rather than other people who don't, who are very cynical. I mean, in order to be canonized as a saint in the church, I forget how many miracles you have to perform. I forget how many miracles it is, but it's a sizable amount of miracles.
The number, I think, has gone up over time.
Yeah.
In the early days.
And you have an investigative, it's a really hard process. It takes years and years usually. I think, some of the quicker saints have been like Mother Teresa and John Paul II, but even then it was about 15 years. But you have, dedicated people, and they purposely bring in, most of the people on the case are non-Catholics, usually atheists. And because that's the whole point. Right. And so saints have to have verified miracles that are spent time investigating. But you never bring up miracles usually to people because people automatically shut that down. That's not what they...
I agree very much. And I think it is a cultural thing. We have like this very materialist viewpoint of the world. Like what is physical is all. You don't particularly see the Protestant church talking a whole lot about miracles that are done in this day and age. You don't hear them talking about stuff that's very non-physical in a sense. It's like this is the physical world and we deal with reality. But I've seen a shift otherwise recently, just in the churches that I've been going to. I'm seeing a lot more stuff where it's like laying on hands, healing through prayer and stuff like that, and invoking the Spirit into a space. I see that more common now than I have in the past in Protestant churches.
Well, I think the big difference here between the two is that most of the miracles done canonized are after they die. It's all invoking of saints after death. That's where miracles come from. And that's something that Protestant church doesn't touch at all. It's when you're dead, you're dead. Whereas
you're
for
in
us,
another world,
my day is spent asking saints to intercede for me and that's like we're constantly invoking the saints. And that's where those miracles come from. So that's the difference there.
Mm-hmm. Ours is power through the Spirit that dwells inside of us. Like that's just, at least when we talk about like just healing through prayer, like a lot of times I'll go to church and towards the end of church we'll have people up at the front and the entire congregation will come and lay hands, and our pastor is saying like through the power of the Holy Spirit we're going to pray for healing for you. It's much more of like that than it is very much like you said.
We don't do any of that.
Yeah.
That's the most
Keep your hands to yourself.
That's the most Protestant you've ever heard you.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Well, on that
note.
Morton Smith, who we've got to note is a controversial but fascinating New Testament scholar, offers us 3 classes of miracle workers circulating at the time. The first was the Goetes, a kind of Greek shaman. Where's James when you need him?
Yeah.
Goetes. The origin of the term as it would be used in medieval grimoires. So the word Goetes would come up in medieval grimoires later.
That's cool.
They entered a state of ecstatic trance and accompanied the dead on their journey to the underworld. A little bit Lazarus-y. The Magus, version number 2. So we have the Goetes and we have the Magus, considered both more powerful and of a higher status than the Goetes, and the Magus came from Persia, the Magi. The Magi were an insular group who practiced incest to keep their bloodline pure. Didn't hear that about the Magi, but fun fact. And practiced a secret brand of magic that they didn't share, so they were more occulty than the Goetes. Jesus did not identify as either of these. Goetes engaged in ecstatic trance to achieve their spirit work, and Magi used complex formulas and talismans like potions and crystals. Jesus took a uniquely straightforward approach.
And a certain woman, which had had an issue of blood 12 years ago, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment.
If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole.
And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press.
Who touched my clothes?
Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me?
It was me. I touched your garment.
Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague.
I love that story.
Why is that?
That's like one of my classic talks, is on the hemorrhaging
It's a
woman.
classic
It's a
Riley lecture.
classic Riley. Oh, let me
Classic.
tell you, whoever listens to this that has ever done anything with me, they can probably say it verbatim.
Okay, so
that
tell
talk.
me why. Why does this
It's a
story
great
speak to you so
question.
much?
Well,
On an emotional level?
yeah, definitely. It's like, that's probably one of the most emotional parts, like, for me, of, I don't know what it is. Has always really very much, like, touched me. And I love the image of this woman. You picture it too, like this just enormous crowd being pushed around, and like this woman who literally has nothing left. Literally, like it's all been gone, and like this is her like very last hope. And I can like, you can just think of this woman who's like hope has been drained from her, and like literally she repeats to herself, if I can just touch the tassel of his cloak, like as she repeats that to herself, and like she's on the ground in this town, city square or whatever, and that he notices her, like, past all of that. Mm-hmm. And, all his apostles are like, you're seriously asking who just touched you? Like, there's all these people around. And as he gets down, like, onto her level and, like, looks at her, and it's a
But he
very
can heal
personal
her
and emotional.
without having to do anything.
Yeah.
This story is really what marks Jesus as unique among
Mm-hmm.
the healers of this time period. He seems to have an indwelling healing power that just comes out of him.
And he can feel it when it does. That's
and he need do nothing to release it.
Yeah.
Which is unlike any of the other healers that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
He's what Morton Smith calls a divine man, not needing trances or rituals or spells, but healing just through an innate power. He didn't even know that the woman had touched him, right? And yet she was healed, regardless of his knowledge. There's another interesting aspect of this account, namely that Jesus feels the power go out of him when he heals. This doesn't mean that the power is finite, but it does show that it has a palpable presence in him. He's a physical response to the act of healing. The reference to physicians in this story is actually a bit misleading. Medicine was certainly primitive at this time period, but poor medical care wasn't generally the cause of protracted illnesses. So this woman wasn't suffering because of bad medicine.
I feel like that was more of a way of saying that she had, like, basically exercised all her resources.
Yes.
Like, there was nothing left, rather than...
It's probably more like the temple that was causing problems. Sickness was associated with sin, and if you were sick, it's because you were sinful. Heavy Roman taxes, which gets at Riley's point about her being on her last dime, led to malnourishment, which precipitated sickness, and sickness was a sign of sin, forcing the victim to turn to the temple to have his or her illness relieved. So you're already poor, the Romans are taxing you, you're turning to the temple, and the temple's demanding high fees for sacrifices to purge your sin, but you don't have the money. The sick also couldn't work, which further exacerbated their trouble. And Jesus, like John the Baptist before him, intervened in this system by healing the sick for free, breaking a vicious cycle. And he commanded his disciples to go out and do the same, for free.
It's almost like Jesus was the first to say, Medicare for all, dude.
Socialism.
Yeah, for real. No. I say this all the time. Like, when you really do look at Jesus, like, very much has, like, a very socialist, collective mindset when it comes to just, like, his idea of a social structure.
But it was also never about government.
No.
Right. It was very communal. I mean, there was a sense that there was an expectation that you as healer would be welcomed into a home and fed. Mm-hmm. But that exchange was not monetary. There was a communalism to the act of healing and being healed. The fact that the disciples didn't bring anything along with them meant they had to rely on other people, as we're saying, to offer them a roof to sleep under and food. They healed and exercised for free in exchange for breaking bread with the family. The fact that they traveled from town to town and never put down roots upset any potential for them to become an establishment unto themselves. They're very anti-establishment. Because if you just stay, then you become this sort of center of power and you develop. So they moved. They kept
Just a
moving.
ragtag group of homeless guys. It's literally
Going
that
with their
somehow
cup and
established the
little
world's
legends.
largest religion.
They had to start anew in each town rather than build the relationships that inspire patronage in the ancient Rome and nepotism and corruption, which the ancient Romans were all about. And let's be honest, so are we.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus' parables and sermons were inspirational. By we, I don't mean this podcast, by the way. I do mean the American government to begin, corporate culture.
Yeah.
Big old capitalism.
Yeah.
You can buy Trump straws now to own the libs.
Yes, Jesus' parables and sermons were inspirational, and yes, Jesus set a powerful example by his martyrdom, but his miracles really cut to the heart of what he was all about, undermining the money-hungry power structure and raising up the disenfranchised. Jesus was a champion of the downtrodden, whose healing was both miraculous and politically radical. He was an enemy of the establishment with its comfortable perch above the rabble, commanding, controlling, victimizing. You liking him any better, Olivia?
Who?
Jesus?
I didn't.
Oh, you're always
ever
on board with Jesus.
dislike
She's like, oh, who?
It's just in a...
No, I've always thought that's part of why, like, I mean, I was the one that wanted to go to church as a kid. Like, my parents didn't put me there. I thought it was interesting.
Me too, actually.
But I always thought it was, like, really cool story time, I think. I could never get past that. But I thought it was so interesting. Like, I don't know.
So the healing that Jesus and his disciples offered required the client to provide a bit more than just a roof and some bread and wine. In order for the client to be healed, he or she had to believe. There's one more component to this, right? This is a point Jesus makes over and over again. The woman who touched the hem of his garment was made whole by her faith.
And the interesting part of it is that is different than the rest of it is because, like, it's not like some requirement he had. Like, oh, before I heal you, you have to believe in me. Tell me you believe in me.
Just happened.
Like she had this belief. It wasn't voiced and it already happened. Like, it was the belief drew it out regardless. It wasn't this,
There's an indwelling condition
Yeah.
of hers.
Yeah.
It's necessary for the healing's efficacy. There's a story of Jesus returning to his hometown and the people there refusing to believe in his miracles because, to them, it was just Jesus.
That's just Jesus.
Right,
Next door.
Jesus. Jesus from
Mary's
the block.
kid. What's he doing here?
Right.
The carpenter. I always wondered if he was like a crappy carpenter. Sorry. Like, like what if he... I always wonder that. Like,
He became a
It's
prophet because
definitely
he's a
good.
bad carpenter.
Like, can you imagine that, like, Jesus, he was, like, the one that made us that, like, shitty shelf? Like, that's what I always thought about.
It's like,
He's turning water.
my one pastor gave a sermon about that. But he was like, imagine
table
how
sucked.
ripped Jesus was.
Jesus was ripped.
Like, muscular.
Oh, yeah,
Because, like, he
dude.
had to work carpentry without,
was
like,
working
proper
his
tools.
hands.
And with those
That's
tribal
cool.
tattoos? Are you kidding?
Dude, he probably had a man bun, too.
I think I'm in love with Jesus.
I guess, but there was a time when he put the
Love of
tools
my
down
life.
and never picked them up again.
You're in love with Jesus.
Oh, absolutely. For a while, I thought I was going to be a nun. Recently not, but for a long time.
Recently not.
Yeah.
Jesus. Little Jesus. Remember when Mary was giving birth to one of the girls and she asked us to come over and watch him? He wet through his nappies into his little tunic, but we didn't have a spare tunic, so we had to dress him in a palm frond. Right. That Jesus. Anyway, he went off to discover himself, and now he's back with a bunch of his long-haired friends. Yeah, says he's God now?
And Mark says, he could do there no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them. Presumably, a bunch more sick folk missed their chance because they didn't believe. This is the spirit cure of the shamans, or the modern-day placebo in its biblical context. Belief has the power to effect actual cures. Right?
Would you still have me on the podcast if I was a nun?
Yes.
Yeah.
Even more so.
I mean,
that'd
could
be
you,
kinda
you
sick.
can't not be on podcast because you're not.
Would you
right
wear
now.
the habit in
I mean,
photographs?
yeah, I'd have to.
Oh, great. Could you imagine? us
That would be.
with the Riley the nun?
That'd be fun.
That'd be metal.
That would be.
Nuns are so cool. All right, moving on.
And they came to Jericho. As he went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. And when he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out.
Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.
Hold your peace, blind beggar.
This man is a great worker of miracles.
He doesn't have time for beggars who are also blind.
Or blind men who are also beggars.
Yeah, be gone.
Please, thou Son of David, have mercy on me.
Call him over.
Who? Him?
Him? But he's blind.
Yeah, and also a beggar.
Yeah, a blind beggar.
Be of good comfort. Rise, he calleth thee.
Thank you, Jesus.
What wilt thou that I should do unto thee?
Lord, that I might receive my sight.
Go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole.
And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way.
Scholars who lack our confessor's understanding of the power of belief and the interconnection between mind, body, and soul tend to argue that all of Jesus' clients were in some sense afflicted by psychosomatic disease. That is to say, they were hysterical patients. Timaeus wasn't actually blind, but suffered from hysterical blindness. Belief in the form of psychosis caused the disease, and so belief could easily heal it. But the volume and variety of ailments that Jesus successfully cured makes that a difficult sell. Matthew and Luke report that Jesus successfully cured leprosy. His first reported healing in Mark is a case of palsy. According to John's Gospel, Lazarus of Bethany was dead for 4 days.
It's a psychosomatic death.
Psychosomatic.
Does Jerusalem just have a problem with psychosomatic diseases?
Everyone's really...
He's just crap, another one.
Really
gosh.
nervous.
Jesus was just the first really good psychologist.
They're a very nervous people.
I guess so.
In truth, Jesus was one of many magicians circulating around Israel and Transjordan at the time period, including magicians who performed miracles much like Jesus. Some of the major miracle workers roving around the Greco-Roman world at the same time include the philosopher Apollonius of Tyana, the physician Asclepiades, and the emperor Vespasian actually did some healing. How about that? What was so special about Jesus that he became the founder of the world's most widespread religion, though? Everyone wants to know. Why not Apollonius or Vespasian? Why don't we have a religion for Vespasian, the Emperor Vespasian? For comparison... What, you got an idea?
I mean, did he call himself God?
No, he probably didn't. Well, yeah, he did. He was the Emperor of Rome.
But, did he, say something that's I created that?
Did Jesus?
A little bit. We can get into that later.
Oh, okay.
But...
I don't know.
So, a little bit. He kind of did.
The Roman emperors.
That's the thing that does set him apart a little bit.
They
is
would have
that
claimed to be God.
he was really, he literally did, he'd perform that stuff, but then afterwards he was like, I did it because I'm God. That was the...
He was like, who am I? Hey, Peter, who am I? God, uh-huh.
But
That's
Vespasian
right.
just left
Everyone
it
else hear that?
Vespasian figured people already knew. For comparison, why don't we take a deep dive into the life of Apollonius? We're picking on Vespasian, but I've actually prepared to talk about Apollonius.
Can you improv one
for
on
the wrong
Vespasian?
guy.
All right, Olivia's going to handle the brief history for us today. Here we go.
About
Brief history.
Up
Did that for you.
here.
Well, actually.
Apollonius.
Apollonius. Thank you. Apollonius was born around the year 2 into a wealthy Greek family. In youth, he trained in and followed the Pythagorean philosophical tradition,
Nice.
the theorem,
yeah.
like the
Pythagoras.
theory
Yeah, like that
in
guy.
math.
Math guy.
Oh,
But he had a whole philosophy.
yeah, I don't even remember the.
Yeah, most philosophers were math guys.
He grew his hair long, gave up women and wine, became a vegetarian, only wore linen, and slept on the ground. I think I know him.
It's very Jesus-y, though. Can you hear the
Yeah,
It's the guy that lives on the corner.
Yeah, he goes to UMD.
He's a philosophy major.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. Hey, guys.
It's Sam.
Sam is planning to be a philosophy major.
My hair's getting long.
Yes. I was going to say something about that. Go ahead.
Sorry. He protested animal sacrifice, gave away his family inheritance, and committed to a 5-year period of silence.
Yeah.
It's a commitment.
I've done 5 days. Not 5 years.
Sounds like what he does for Riley. That feels like a feat for you.
Oh, I
Sounds
felt
like
a lot.
a
That's
big
gotta
old nerd.
5 whole days of complete silence.
I'm
That's
impressed.
a lot for you.
Yeah, my dream was the 30-day one.
After emerging from his silence, he traveled to Turkey, Persia, where he learned from the Magi, India, where he studied with the naked
Gymnosophists.
Gymnosophists.
Yeah. Everyone's got to study with someone who's naked.
Yeah.
Rob, why didn't we study with you while you were...
Title IX.
Yeah, Title IX. That's
Yeah.
entirely the reason.
And the less naked Brahmins, Nevaeh, Babylon, and Egypt.
Nineveh.
Nineveh.
Yeah.
That
Nineveh
seemed more
90.
right.
It's a
Is
really
Nineveh? Isn't
What?
Nineveh in the Bible?
Nineveh 90 is
Isn't
what?
Nineveh
It's a super extreme 90-day thing that you do, like kind of a relent, where it's like you get rid of, you don't do, it's just extreme penance, like you don't eat anything, and you don't like. I've known people have done it.
Isn't
Like the people of Nineveh did?
In that
What
story?
did they do to deserve that?
They did a lot of things. I forget.
They're the bad people in that one story in the VeggieTales movie,
In
right?
Jonah.
Yes.
Oh, they didn't believe him, and then he got into the whale. They scared Jonah
That's
into the
the
whale.
town where all the bad people live, right?
Yeah.
They're all sinning.
There are a lot of towns with bad people.
No,
in
but
it,
it's
like
like a whole thing.
No,
you
but
scare a
it's no
prophet
like
into a
Gomorrah,
whale.
you know.
You
No,
need
but-
90 days.
It's no Gomorrah, but
He was inducted in the mysteries of a series of cults into the Eleusinians. And he performed a series of miracles. At the wedding of his former student Menippus, he discerned that Menippus' bride was actually a Lamia, a serpent-like child eater. Wow,
Yeah,
that escalated.
The guy was like, "Come to my wedding," and Apollonius was like, "Cool, sounds fun."
Yeah.
And then he gets to the wedding. He's like, "Hey, you're a bride there.
how do you do that? Oh, yeah, you
She's
break
a
the
demon.
news.
She's a serpent demon who eats children."
And the wedding feast, along with all the guests, were merely an illusion.
Yeah. So and here's the next
Why? Wait,
piece of
so it wasn't
information.
actually a wedding?
Yeah, he
He was
came
the
to
only
the
real
wedding.
person there.
Fact number 1, he had to tell the bridegroom was bride's a demon. Fact
And
number
that
2
nobody's
was
here.
none of these people are here.
Wait, how do we even know if Apollonius is there?
Ooh,
But wait,
there's the
did
philosophy
groom?
major.
Wait, did
Yeah, there he is.
God. But did the groom know
Don't
that
roll
they
your
were all
eyes
there?
at me.
Yeah, he thought they were.
So he had to break it. Not only did he have to break the
Yeah.
child eater, but he was like, no one's at your wedding. It's just me."
Apollonius dispelled the illusion and rescued the bridegroom.
There you go.
Aww.
Nice guy.
He healed a man whose hip had been dislocated when a lion leapt at him and gave sight to a man who had had his eyes put out. To cure a woman who had bad trouble in labor, he told her husband to walk once around her when she was about to deliver with a hair clutched to his bosom and then release the hair.
That's what I tell women
That's some
to do.
pagan shit right there.
Check.
That's what I, and, as a doula.
A boy was
That's exactly what I say.
A boy was bit by a mad dog and began acting like a dog himself, running around on all fours and licking himself in front of his neighbors. Apollonius perceived exactly where the dog was who bit him, brought the dog to heel, and had the dog lick the boy's wounds, curing both the boy and the dog of the madness.
See, he's a man of the people and the dog.
And the dog.
Loves the dog.
He didn't do any. Jesus. Yeah, no. He
Didn't heal
actually
any
cast
dogs.
demons into pigs.
Yeah.
Not out of them.
Bummer for
He
those
also-
pigs.
Yeah, they drowned themselves.
Yeah, they did. Real quick. In fact,
He also raised the dead. While on his travels, he came across a man following a funeral procession for a girl. The girl was a new bride who had died at her own wedding before her marriage vows could be fulfilled. Apollonius asked the girl's name, and the crowd at the procession thought he was about to give a speech in her honor, but instead he leaned over her and began to whisper. The girl woke and spoke and went to her father's house. Her father offered Apollonius 150,000
Sesterces.
sesterces.
what
That's
are
difficult.
those?
So a whole bunch of coins.
Like,
Oh,
so what is
are
it
they
worth? Like
worth a
3
lot?
donkeys and $40? Something
Yeah, about
like that.
there, yeah.
I mean,
Okay, cool.
he got 150,000 of them, so.
Well, did Apollonius keep them?
But Apollonius told the father to give it to the young woman as a dowry.
Social justice.
Apollonius had mixed relationships with the emperors of Rome. He befriended Vespasian, but was a harsh critic of his son, Domitian. Domitian?
Yeah, you got it.
The last of Vespasian's.
The last of the Flavian dynasty.
Thank you.
Which was only 3 guys.
Apollonius had been in the habit of criticizing Domitian and may have been accused of attempting to divine the fate of a conspiracy against Domitian by reading the entrails of a sacrificed boy. Domitian was, by all accounts, not especially cool. He more or less neutered the Senate and expelled any critics from its ranks. He ruled as a despot from the imperial court, which he wasn't often at, traveling off to conduct military campaigns and leaving Rome leaderless since the seat of power went wherever he was. He micromanaged the state and the military. He punished writers who spoke out against him with exile or death, not especially unusual for emperors, but he also forbade mimes from performing, and the public loved
mimes.
And the loved
They
mimes.
The
Yeah.
Romans loved mimes.
Outrage over
And he
mimes.
just decided, like, can't do that anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, the Roman mimes are not the same as like our mimes. It wasn't a guy in a beret with the white
Yeah.
face paint. They were.
But did they do the same thing?
Did they
no,
also
no,
make a box?
they did comedies and stuff.
Why would
like-
he say no? Just
There
because
was
he's
there was
jerk?
pantomime, which was silent, and then there was mime, which was mime more
Like
like
a
mimicry.
clown?
Mimicking life,
Oh.
yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, no way.
So he just was like, no more mimes because I suck.
Yes, he was mean.
And in 87, he punished several Vestal virgins for failing to maintain their vows of chastity by burying them alive according to the custom.
Rough, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, being buried alive is like my biggest fear.
You and everyone in the
You and
19th
Edgar Allan
century.
Poe. Yeah, I was about to say.
That's so scary.
Yeah.
At his trial, Apollonius mocked the trial, implied that Socrates had somehow survived his execution, and abused his judges.
Man of Tyana, you must enter the court with nothing on you.
Are we then to take a bath or to plead?
The rule does not imply to dress, but the emperor only forbids you to bring in here either amulet or book or any papers of any kind.
And not even a cane for the back of the idiots who gave him such advice as this?
Tell me you went out of your house on a certain day, and you traveled into the country and sacrificed the boy. I would like to know for whom.
If I did leave my house, I was in the country. And if this was so, then I offered sacrifice. And if I offered it, then it was the sort of sacrifice that a man such as myself could eat, which I did. But let these assertions be proved by trustworthy witnesses.
I acquit you of the charges, but you must remain here until we have had a private interview. Clearly, the people approve of you.
I thank you indeed, my sovereign. But by reason of these miscreants, your cities are in ruin, and the islands full of exiles, and the mainland of lamentations, and your armies of cowardice, and the senate of suspicion. I must speak out against these failings. But if you will not, then send someone to take my body. For my soul you cannot take. Nay, you cannot take even my body, for thou shalt not slay me, since I tell thee I am not mortal.
And then he vanished from the courtroom like Houdini and went about his life completely unafraid of the emperor's vengeance. Later, he psychically perceived the moment of Domitian's murder in Rome. Domitian had dreamed that he saw the goddess Minerva, and she told him she'd been disarmed by Jupiter and could no longer protect him. Domitian believed he'd be killed at noon and had developed a habit of growing restless at midday. At noon on the 18th of September in the year 96, when he asked a servant the time, the servant lied and said late afternoon, putting the emperor at ease. His steward, Stephanus, had been wearing a bandage around his arm for several days, feigning an injury. Stephanus came into the emperor's chamber, brandishing a document that he claimed proved a plot against the emperor's life. As Domitian took the paper in hand, the steward pulled a dagger out from inside the bandage on his arm and stabbed the emperor in the groin.
Right in the groin.
Damn.
Good place to stab.
Domitian struggled, but was stabbed 7 more times.
7 more times. That's how you kill an emperor. You don't stab him once.
Yo.
7 times
In
and
a-
in the groin.
I don't know if they were all in the groin.
I hope not.
Do you think he spread it out?
Yeah, it started in the groin, worked his way up.
In Ephesus?
In Ephesus.
In Ephesus, Apollonius was giving a speech to a crowd when he suddenly dropped into a trance and said, "Smite the tyrant, smite him," at the exact moment when Domitian breathed his last. Apollonius went on to set up a school in Ephesus and died later that year or the next. The exact time and nature of his death is shrouded in mystery and adds to his legend. And that's a brief history of Apollonius of Tyana.
Very nice.
Iconic person.
Yeah, what a guy. So what's the point of all that? Jesus and Apollonius have a lot in common. They both healed the sick, they both raised the dead, they both challenged authority, they both opposed sacrifice as a religious principle, they both achieved miraculous escapes from their oppressors, and they both claimed some form of divinity. Apollonius was a pagan, whereas Jesus was a Jew, but that shouldn't have made much difference. If anything, Greco-Roman paganism was the more widely accepted tradition at the time. So the question for us becomes, why don't we all worship at the temple of Apollonius and pray to him?
That's actually a good point, because the Jews were under Roman rule
Yeah.
and subjugated, almost looked at as second-class citizens.
Apollonius should have been the more popular choice. And yet, so let's figure it out. Let's start with the fact that Apollonius wasn't a martyr. And martyrdom, self-sacrifice for the salvation of humanity, was arguably the hallmark of early Christianity. Let's take a quick moment for Stephen, my favorite saint. Stephen was a member of the early church, one of the 7 deacons appointed by the apostles to distribute aid to the poor. He raised the ire of the establishment by speaking out in Greek synagogues, arguing for Christian principles and against the Jewish clergy. He argued that God dwells beyond the limits of the temple, whereas the priests strictly controlled access to God's mercy and grace, and that people resisted God when they refused to listen to his prophets and to Jesus, and now to Stephen himself. The crowd grew incensed around him, and Stephen had a sudden vision which he shared with the crowd of heaven opening and the Son of Man, Jesus, sitting on the right hand of God. The crowd, now enraged to the point of homicide, took up rocks and stoned him to death, while Stephen prayed aloud for the Lord to receive his soul and forgive his killers. One of the witnesses of this stoning was Saul, who would make one of the most famous conversions in the history of Western religion and change his name to Paul.
The S to the P.
S to the P.
Good old Paul.
The sheer passion of the martyrs was a powerful recruitment tool. These people, following Jesus of Nazareth's example, were willing and sometimes even anxious to give their lives for their new religion. Seeing this, the witnesses to their faith and self-sacrifice became quick converts.
It wasn't it
To
Peter
this day.
who got crucified? He was
Upside
like,
down.
yeah, they're like, "We're crucify you," and he's like, "All right, do it upside down though."
Because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified in the same way. To this day, martyr. I mean, like that's if you die as a martyr, you're automatically. So there's 3 steps to becoming a saint. First one's servant of God. Second one is a blessed. You're beatified. Third one is you're a saint. You're canonized. It's a long process. But if you're a martyr, you're automatically a servant of God. You don't have to
Skip a few steps.
Yeah. No, I like martyrdom is literally like when I was little, I like prayed that I could be a martyr. Like literally, I mean, yeah.
There was that guy who got in that little canoe and went to the island where very recently,
Yeah.
a missionary.
Oh,
I don't know which tradition he
Well,
represented, but
he was like an evangelical.
Christian missionary. Well, he was in the family.
About
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, that was crazy.
One of our guys.
But
Goes to the
and they kill
isolated
everyone
island.
who
Yeah,
comes
because
to the
they're literally
island,
they're like
and they killed him.
But he like knew that they were gonna like he had knowledge that they did this, but he still did it.
But his faith of having to get the good news to them drove him there anyway.
that was never my. I don't know. I always wanted like the. I mean, I loved like Joan of Arc. That was my like.
You wanted to die
Burned?
defending France?
Yeah, exactly. I just really love France.
Oh man, I just can't wait to defend the Eastern Shore and burn for it.
Oh, good. That could happen.
No, but I finally realized.
I think it's possible.
No, but I also think it's like, I mean, the classic Catholic thing of dying to yourself. Like for me, I totally wanted to be a martyr, but I was like, I think that would be an easier choice for me than the other way around of like living and like having to die to myself every day, like having to have that little
work
death
for
every
it.
day. Yeah, like I don't like
The Buddha
like,
life.
I don't make just one choice. I got to make that choice every
Every
day
day.
to decide to die to die.
Buddha had to do 80 years.
Yeah.
So, Christianity spread until at last it won its most famous convert. Well, historically, maybe its most famous and significant, the Emperor Constantine, becoming the state religion of Rome, and the rest, as they say, is what happened. Jesus' sacrifice remains the central symbol of Christianity, as Riley's pointing out. It has influenced her all these 2,000 years later. The religion is, after all, symbolized by the cross, the literal device for his execution. Just take a second to think about that.
Yeah.
But pagans are supposed to be weird and creepy.
The central ritual of church service is the consumption of bread and wine, symbolizing or instantiating, Riley, his body and blood, given for the
We don't need
sake
to get
of
into that.
humanity's
I
salvation.
mean, even with like the youth program that I work with, Young Life, like the main goal of Young Life is to get people to learn and know of the sacrifice. Like that is the main thing. It's like getting people to know about what he did.
The whole thing. It's
Yeah.
literally the whole thing.
So that's why we have Jesus and not Apollonius. Church of Jesus, not Church of Apollonius. Olivia, bring us on home.
I hereby adjourn and declare closed this meeting of the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors till such a time as we get together and do it again.
Our voices today came from Sean Priest, also James Kaplangis, Shannon Landers, and our discussants joined us as well, doing our voices. Am I missing anyone?
Jacob.
Check. Jacob Wheatley. There we go.
Good old Jacob.
I remember G. Jacob.
There you go, Jacob. Riley loves you.
I do.
In the discussion, oh boy, we never came up with a name for Sam.
Oh,
Oh, dude. Yeah.
can we ask for ideas?
Yeah, we can ask for ideas.
You know, I'm all about that. Go ahead. I would love to hear what the Order of Professors has.
Okay, so it's time for Sam to be titled, because Riley's been titled. Everyone else in this circle's been titled, and Sam just got through an hour and 38 minutes of being Catholicized. So he deserves a title.
There's many more hours to go.
We're going to push...
I am so scared.
We're gonna put out a poll on the old social medias. Find us on Facebook or Instagram, and let us know what you think we should call Sam based on his conversation with us here today, or the subsequent the previous episodes that we've heard from.
Yeah, I was on the Chinese
Secret Societies.
Yeah, that was a good time.
You've also done some interesting voices for us.
Oh.
Yeah. I also did the mini episode on the Tao.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so...
I'm also a patron.
That is the end of our discussion of Jesus of Nazareth, but never fear, for the Christians remain with us for 2 more episodes. But now we're going to go down the rabbit hole. We return with demonology next.
I'm back.
And then exorcism.
I'm so back.
Can I come back?
You can come do exorcism. Yeah.
I don't have any of that.
Protestants did perform exorcisms during the Renaissance.
Did we really?
The difference between a Catholic and Protestant exorcism is that a Protestant would go in a closet and pray for a few days, whereas a Catholic would whip out their true cross relics and have all kinds of be debating with the demon and
that's what we
But
do.
the Protestants over in the closet.
I'll be in the closet.
I mean,
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to the end of the episode.
if you got this far,
Yeah,
congrats.
You're a true confessor.
Wow.
I'll give you a big ol' high five.
Yeah, if you manage to find us, Sam on the Eastern Shore, it will high five you. All right,
The first one to find us gets a
2 high fives.
2 high fives. Honestly, Riley really made Protestantism sound pretty vanilla.
It's pretty vanilla.
Join us next time as we discuss Solomon
Just to clear that up.
and the demons here on Occult Confessions.
Riley, that when I texted in our group chat, it was like, where can I learn about this Jesus fellow? And you responded with, the Catholic Church. I put my phone down and went,
I just put nice.
yeah, it was just a nice, I didn't respond at all.
This could be I think it's going to be a fun episode.